welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Julia Bartz is a best-selling author, therapist, and creative coach. Her debut thriller, The Writing Retreat, was an instant New York Times bestseller and received starred reviews from Kirkus and Booklist. As a creative coach, Julia helps people find joy and fulfillment in their creative pursuits. She lives in Brooklyn. Julia Bartz, thank you so much for being here today. We have a lot to talk about because you're not only a best-selling author, you're also a licensed therapist and a creative coach. So lots to cover. But let's start out by talking about this best-selling thriller, The Writing Retreat, which recently came out in paperback. In a starred review, Booklist called The Writing Retreat stomach-clenchingly thrilling from beginning to end. Publishers Weekly says it's an audacious psychological thriller debut. Boldly drawn characters complement Bartz's gleefully twisted plot. And in another starred review, Kirkus says the book's pacing, a slow roll of dread and horror, is exceptional. A perfect winter night's haunting. Or a spring night's haunting. We'll throw that in. It's a haunting for all seasons.
Yeah. Why not?
So for those of us, well, I have read it. For those who haven't read it yet, what can you tell us about The Writing Retreat?
Yeah. So again, Kelley, thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here. The Writing Retreat is about a woman named Alex who has always wanted to be a writer, but things are not really going as planned. She happens to get invited to a writing retreat that's being put on by her favorite author, the horror novelist Rosa Vallow. Unfortunately, when she gets to Rosa's estate, along with the other writers, things are not quite as they seem. And as the retreat starts to turn into a nightmare, Alex realizes that she might have much more than just her career at stake.
Great. What was the origin for this? The origin story for the novel? How did this one come to you? How did it start out?
Yeah. So I actually had to go back into my files and my notes to figure out when exactly I did start it because I was like, where did this come from? Where did this idea come from? It's very twisted, it's very dark. And I realized that I had actually written the very first draft as a NaNoWriMo book.
Wow.
So for anyone who doesn't know what NaNoWriMo is, that's National Novel Writing Month. And that's when a group of people get together online to write. It's not like a full novel, but I think it's like 50 to 60,000 words in 1 month's time. And I did it with two friends of mine, or my sister, Andrea Bartz, and a friend, Leah Conan. We decided to kind of do it together. This was 10 years ago. This was a really long time ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I think I was the only one that actually finished the month. So I felt very proud of myself. So I actually found this old file and I was reading through this version and, it was about Alex. It was about her having a friend breakup with Ren and then fleeing New York. In that version, it was actually pretty different from the writing retreat. She ended up in Montana and she was basically seeing Rosa in her dreams. Like she was sleepwalking and having these really weird, experiences with Rosa, who turned out to be like an alien. So there were
very different.
very different, more of a sci-fi slant. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I remember writing that and liking all the characters, but something about the story just wasn't quite working. And so I set it aside. And a couple years later, I was thinking about it again. I think I had, so before the writing retreat, I also wrote 2 other books that were ultimately not published. So I think after the second one didn't work out, I was kind of thinking about this idea again. And then the idea of setting it at a writing retreat just kind of like ascended from on high, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh my God, like everything clicked into place. And I became really excited about the idea of kind of switching it into more of like a horror thriller rather than the sci-fi. And I also decided to, um, at first I wasn't sure if I was even going to write the book because I'd had these disappointments with the other two. And I was thinking, maybe it's just time to move on, to find a plan B. I was in the midst of a career change to becoming a therapist. And so I was in grad school. I was quite busy. Um,
Mhm.
but I ultimately decided that I just liked the idea too much, that I really wanted to try it. But I wanted to use it as almost an exercise, kind of a cathartic exercise, and exploring the disappointments of being a writer and what
Oh,
that
wow. That's great. That really takes the pressure off too.
totally, yeah. And I told myself, I'm not going to think about the outcome. I'm not going to think about, is this going to get published or not? I'm just going to really focus on the book and write the story that I would most love to read because I love, there's a lot of elements that I threw in, the haunted house trope and, all these different tropes. So I just wanted to, really just go there. And as I was becoming a therapist too, I was learning about shadow parts and I wanted to explore those as well. So I
Mhm.
just decided to go as dark as I possibly could.
Turned out well.
Yeah, it worked out. Ironically, right?
Let's talk for a minute about the setting of the story. You really do make great use of this confined setting, and it is very haunted house, in a craft sense of the way that the setting is used, but also in a plot sense. The estate has a past, and you weave in some of those supernatural elements. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? About this haunted house part of the story?
Yeah. I have always loved haunted house stories so much.
Mhm.
I think some of the top couple are, Stephen King's The Shining, The Overlook Hotel, Shirley Jackson's, oh my God, I'm blinking.
Hill House.
Full House, yes.
Yeah.
Um, Tananarive Due wrote an incredible book called The Good House that was about a haunted house. Um, and so, yeah, I was really thinking about how to integrate that into the story. Like, what would be kind of the creepiest haunted house that I could come up with. And I think around the time that I was coming up with the haunted house, I went to an exhibit at the Guggenheim with
Mhm.
Hilma af Klint, who was a Swedish painter who um, created these incredible abstract works that predated Kandinsky and all these other abstract artists. And she was actually part of a group that did seances. And so she would channel different um, paintings, basically. She would like talk to these beings from the other side and channel these incredible works of art. And so I thought that was such a fascinating story. And I decided to really integrate that pretty much wholesale, just kind of using that same idea. And so that was, a fun part of it, coming up with the history. And there's unsolved murders that take place in this house. There's secrets in the house, secret parts of the house. And I wanted, basically as we go deeper into the story for things to kind of, I don't want to give anything away, but kind of go like even deeper into the house, almost like going into like
Mm.
psyche and uncovering
Uh-huh.
all the creepy stuff there. So yeah, it was really fun to work on that.
And the pacing.
Mm.
I think one of the reviews that we read earlier particularly mentioned the pacing. There are so many twists and so much tension in this novel, but it doesn't feel fatiguing. You really know how to hit that sweet spot between, making us want to read just one more chapter, but not feeling like overloaded with information and tension, too much at once. So, does that come naturally to you, or is that something that you've had to work to cultivate?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. So this was the first book that I fully plotted. I didn't plot the whole thing beforehand, but I kind of split it into parts. And I think it's so funny because I know so many thriller writers who are pantsers, where they just kind of write by the seat of their pants. And
Mhm.
awe of that. I'm just like, how do you do that? That's incredible. Like, how do you, because it feels like there's so much planning for there to be reveals and playoffs or payoffs, sorry. Um, and so that was something that I was pretty intentional with this book. And yeah, there's a couple plot books that I can mention. I mean, Save the Cat is a big one. John Truby wrote a great book for plotting, and it helps you see how reveals are really necessary for this type of book. Um,
Hmm.
and throughout the book, like ideally, you start on the kind of slower side. And as you get further on, there's more reveals and they're coming faster and faster, and the reveals themselves are getting bigger and bigger. So I thought that was like such an interesting way to think about it and to plan.
Mhm.
And it was fun for me too to come up with basically everyone in the house has some type of secret. Things come out as the book goes on. And I wouldn't say that I knew everything. Yeah, I mean the further out in the book I got, the less that I knew. But as I kind of moved into the like section, I basically broke it up into three parts, or sorry, four parts. And each part I was really focusing on that. And I'm not sure. I know you're a writer too. I'm not sure
Mhm.
how you are you a pantser or are you a plotter?
I would love to be a plotter, but I am sadly so far a pantser. So I'm trying to figure out that kind of balance. I feel like I can't get anything out unless I'm just trying to like set a timer and make myself write
Mm,
and
totally.
see what comes. But then, yeah, I find I'm working on something now that is veering more and more towards that sort of thriller. And I think, oh Lord, I what do I do with all this? And how do I make sure it's all like in the right spot? And how do you do it? So were you a pantser before and then got into plot?
I was. Yeah, the first two books were um more intuitive, which I think can work for a lot of books. I think it can work for thrillers too. And I would say what I'm doing now is kind of a combination of the two because I don't sit down and plot the whole book out beforehand. Like I don't think I could do that. And I think I like some of the discovery that happens when you're writing and working on it. Um, because that's the fun part of it too, right? Is like not knowing if a character will surprise you or, an idea will come to you that will change everything. Like that can be really like thrilling and really fun. So yeah, I think it's a combination. But I know pantsers, like from what I've heard, they just kind of get the draft out and then, whether you're a plotter or a pantser, you will need to go back probably many times and edit and change things. But yeah, I think either way can work.
Yeah. How do you remember about how far along you were either with this one, either with the writing retreat or anything that you're sort of working on going forward? About how far along are you before do you know like who the bad guys are from the beginning? Or is that, I think you said you're kind of figuring that out too, or at least you were with the writing retreat.
Uh, With the writing retreat, I think I did not know initially
Hmm.
which of the other attendees would have something up their sleeves, so to speak.
Mm.
I mean, obviously, I knew that Rosa was going to be a wild card
Yeah.
character, hints of chaos type thing. The book that I'm working on now, kind of similar. Like I think I usually know like one or two antagonists
Mm.
initially,
Mhm.
and then there's some like characters in the middle where I'm like, I don't know, it could go either way. They could be, what is the term? It's like fake ally opponent or fake
Mhm.
opponent ally. So I love that idea of switching where you think one person's going to be one thing and then they turn out to be something else.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of switching and seemingly one thing and then another, um, I feel like the writing retreat in many ways is about the many facets of female relationships. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny. As you know, when the book came out, I had a lot of people contacting me to tell me that they'd been through, they'd experienced some kind of friend breakup or something had happened. And I think a lot of women experience that. And I think now it's being more widely talked about and accepted as something that's very significant in our lives. But I think in the past, like even if you've been friends with someone for 10 years, if you have a friend breakup, it's not considered the same as a romantic breakup. It's
Mm-hmm.
just given the same weight. So that was something that I had definitely experienced myself and something that I really wanted to explore. Um, Obviously, there's kind of an added dimension to that in the writing retreat. Um, and I don't want to give anything away,
Yeah.
but I, female friendships, whether they're completely platonic or whether they're not, like they can be very, very intimate and it
Mhm.
can be really devastating and destabilizing when those friendships end.
Yeah. Um, it feels like the story's also about the creation of art and what we might be willing to sacrifice in order to bring art into being. Is that something that you personally think about a lot?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about it a lot. Um, It's funny. I was listening to your episode with Isa Adney, and she
Hmm.
was talking about her. She had kind of a dark night of the soul after she
Yeah.
didn't get into the doctoral program. And I definitely went through something like that myself in terms of, from a very young age, knowing that I wanted to be a writer, writing stories and books as far back as I can remember. That was kind of my identity. That was my thing. And, I thought a part of that would be getting published.
Mhm.
And I expected that um, to happen, at different points. And it wasn't happening and it wasn't happening. And I think there's this idea in society, I think it's the whole capitalistic bootstraps, like, oh, well, if you put enough effort into it, you'll get it, right?
Mhm.
Just keep going and like do whatever you need to do and work at a coffee shop or whatever, which is great. I've definitely worked at coffee shops before. But I don't think that we're always aware of um, the obstacles and how long it can take. Um, it can take decades sometimes. So after my second book, I had gotten an agent for that book and we'd revised a lot together. And then things kind of fell apart. And I've heard that that's actually not uncommon. And I've talked to other people who have gone through that too.
Mhm.
But it was really disappointing. And so that was the point where I really had my dark night of the soul and was saying, thinking to myself, like, I can't keep doing this. Like, it's just this constant feeling of failure, rejection, um, and shame too. Like, I felt personal shame about it. Um,
Mhm.
Even though, again, I think this is a really common situation. And so I think at that point, and again, I was going into the therapy world, which I find um, incredible. I really love it and find it really interesting and exciting. Um, and with the writing, there's only so much control you have over the publication process.
Mhm.
So I started to shift at that point into, well, how, this, my creativity has become this thing that it's almost like I'm fighting against it. Like I feel like I'm pushing myself to keep going because I just want this end goal to happen. And yeah, it was very depleting, led to burnout, led to depression. And incidentally, that's when I started therapy myself and was like, oh, I love therapy. I want to do this for other people too. Um, but nowadays it's interesting because I do creative coaching and so I work with artists and a lot of writers. And I think the most important thing is trying to figure out like how can your creative life be something that um, feels um, like pleasure and joy and something that you look forward to and something that you want to do and not something that's just like on your list or you're like pushing yourself to do it because you feel like you have to get to this point. And that's something that I was really trying to show in the writing retreat too. Um, Alex goes through that same process where she feels like I haven't gotten this thing that I wanted. Other people seem like they're ahead of me. She starts to sacrifice certain things to get what she thinks that she wants. And at
Hmm.
the end of the book, she realizes, you know what, like if I write, then I'm a writer and that's it. And so that's something that I think we can all maybe, you know, internalize that a little bit more and just figure out like, you know, I had put so much pressure on just my writing and kind of neglected these other areas of my life as well. So
Hmm.
thinking about like, how can I have a full life, which includes this thing that I love, this creative work, but it doesn't feel like everything's riding on it.
Yeah, and it's so great to sort of hear that backstory too and everything behind it and sort of make this distinction because I think we hear debut novel, instant New York Times bestseller, and it just sort of sounds like, oh wow, everything just worked out, right away for her. And that is not the case. I would assume that's probably not usually ever the case for anybody. There's lots and lots and lots of slog and hard work that's going on and rejection behind the scenes before that
Yeah, yeah,
that
and
big day comes.
absolutely. Yeah, I've had people reach out to me and say, like, I'm in this decade of my life. I think it's too late for me. And I'm
Mhm.
always just like, no, like, if this is something you enjoy, like, just focus on it. And people get published at all different stages of their lives. I do think that if you keep going and you keep refining your craft and you keep putting yourself out there, I think something will eventually happen. But again,
Mhm.
it can take longer than people think.
Yeah, yeah. So when it did happen for you, when this one did come out into the world, what was that like? How did that happen? How did the actual publication go for you?
Hmm. Yeah. In terms of after it
In
came out?
terms of the road to, no, actually, I'm thinking of, your road to publication. So you were in a sort of burnout stage and then taking the pressure off and trying to sort of, enjoy the creative process. And then what?
Yeah. So the writing, again, I wrote the very initial draft 10 years before. So it's, stopping and starting. It took some time. I think writing the version that's out happened a little more quickly within the last couple of years. I sent it to some writer friends, beta readers to read it and give me their feedback. So I was editing and changing. And then I started reaching out to agents.
Hmm.
So, I'm sure you've talked about that on your podcast. I'm happy to talk more about it. Um,
Yeah, go for it. It's always nice to hear everyone's experience.
okay, yeah. Yeah, so it's it's such an interesting process. You basically just reach out to agents who you feel like might be a good fit for your
Mhm.
book and who might be interested in it. One way to do that is to look at similar books to the one that you're writing to see who the agents of the authors for those books are. And then it's a very specific email or letter that you send to those agents, typically email these days. And I think agentquery.com is always the one that I recommend because it has examples, it shows you how to break up the letter into different parts. And the hardest part is encapsulating your book in like one paragraph. Like that is
Mm.
so hard to do. And doing it in a way that is really intriguing for people. Um, so yeah, so that's working on the query letter. I had friends, writer friends, edit that, and send me their thoughts on that. This is like your one chance, so you really want this query letter to be just like super solid and as good as possible. And then you start reaching out to people. And I also recommend um, not reaching out to everyone at one time, like maybe start with 5 or 10 people
Mhm.
um, and see what kind of responses you get. Because again, you only have one chance to reach out to an agent. So you might get feedback or you might Agents might be interested in it. They might ask to see the manuscript. They may give you feedback at that point. So you might want to be editing your book then before sending it out to more people. Um, so this time, I got lucky. I had a couple of agents who were interested, and I went with Alexandra Machinist, who's incredible. Um, and at that point, she and I worked on edits for a bit, and then she sent the book out to editors. And so there was a couple editors who were interested. We went with Emily Bestseller, who she's amazing. She was editor for the book You, amongst many others.
Mm.
And she just seemed like the best fit. She was totally on board with all the craziness. Not everyone was like um, okay with it, but she was just
Oh,
like,
wow.
yeah, we're gonna keep it all, we're gonna do it. And so I loved her enthusiasm. And so yeah, so she became my editor. She and I worked together to edit the book, and then we went through the um, publishing process. So there's, all the different points of edits, copy editing, proofreading, sending out galleys to people, and so yeah, and then the book published February 2023, and that was interesting too. Sorry, I'm just like going on now. I'm
No,
giving you
it's
like the whole
great.
story.
Yeah, this is great.
Okay, good. Um, but yeah, my issue is that I had always had a huge fear of public speaking. So when the book publishing was coming up, I became terrified basically because I knew I was going to do events, I was going to do interviews.
Thank you for mentioning this because I feel like this is a thing with lots of writers, and it feels like it's such a thing that you have to get comfortable with if you're actually going to try to publish.
Yes, yes. And I've spoken with other writers who have shared that they too went through a lot of fears around this.
Mhm,
Luckily, I was able to connect with a woman named Erica Ackerman,
mhm,
who she is a voice coach and a somatic therapist. She's in LA. She works with a lot of actors who have fears, of being, who have stage fright.
mhm.
And so working with her was just, I'm so grateful every day that I worked with her, because my first event was a book of the month club, like live interview that was being taped
Wow.
in front of a live audience. And if I hadn't had Erica, I don't know that I would have been able to do it. So she really helped me be able to like regulate my body and just like um, think, kind of reframe my thinking to, this is a chance, these interviews are a chance for you to connect with people, or like, maybe share information about writing and the process and all of that. So yeah, so that worked out really well. Um, yeah, and that's basically the whole story.
And you now do we've mentioned, creative coaching for other writers going through different stages of this process. So how does that work exactly? What does the creative coaching look like?
Yeah, the coaching has been so fun. I love the coaching because people um I think people can use a little help and support at basically any stage of the writing process. So
Mhm,
I've worked with people who are just starting, books or stories that they want to work on. I've worked with people who have finished manuscripts who are starting the agent querying process. And at all these different stages in between. I also help people who just want to integrate more creativity into their lives, or maybe they used to, as children, they were into, art or writing and they want to get back to that.
mhm.
And so, yeah, every client has their own situation and their own challenges, and having someone who's just been through it, I think, can be really helpful. Not everyone has a lot of writer friends around them, and yeah, it's really enjoyable. Sometimes I help people with query letters. Sometimes I help people with plot issues or challenges that they're running into. It really depends.
And how did you get into doing that, doing the creative coaching?
Yeah. Um, so I think I was listening to a podcast a while ago, and there was a creative coach on who was being interviewed, and just listening to her, um, I had this aha moment, and I just thought, wow, I'm a writer and I'm a therapist. Maybe I can kind
Yeah.
of marry the two into doing the creative coaching. And something that I think that I can bring, um, particularly because of my therapy background, is resistance.
Mm.
So in therapy, if want to do something or overcome this challenge, but you're just not able to do it, there's usually a reason for that. And there may be parts of you that are coming up that are either scared to actually do that, or they may not want to. There may be reasons that it's um, actually good for you not to get the thing that you want. For example, in my case, that maybe that would be my fear of public speaking. Maybe there was a part
Yeah.
of me that knew that if I got the publishing deal, I would have to then go on stage in front of people, and that was really kind of scary. And this is not to say that people don't face like external issues. Like, of
Mhm.
course, there's a lot of systemic reasons why people are challenged. Especially with things like not having enough time or not having enough energy. That's not always internal, but sometimes it is. So that can be something that is helpful to really take some time to explore, because I'm not going to push people. Like, I had a consultation with someone who was like, "Well, I just need. Would you just like push me?" And I was like, "I don't think like I think you would push back harder then. Like, there's something
Yeah.
preventing you. If I add to that, you're just going to push back more. So let's really dig in and figure out, what are the reasons that you're not, writing for 30 minutes a day, or whatever that you say that you want to do."
Mhm. Mhm. And how do you think that your work as a therapist informs your own writing? I guess your writing, the way that you approach writing, and also your work, your characters and whatnot.
hmm So I feel lucky that I was going through the process of becoming a therapist at the time that I was writing the writing retreat, because I think it really deepened my understanding of the characters.
Mm.
Um, all of them have backgrounds, family history, trauma of different kinds. It could be ancestral, it could be racial. Um, we all have things that have really strongly affected us, and sometimes, yeah, are still with us to this day.
Mhm.
Whether even if we've worked through them, they're still a part of us. They're still there. So that was something that I wanted to really go deeply into and really think about. Um, and then also, I think I briefly mentioned shadow parts before, but
Mhm.
that was something that I was so interested in. And it's basically the idea that when we're young, we are taught to repress parts of ourselves that are not seen to be kind of socially acceptable. So for
Mm.
girls, this could have to do with anger, aggression, sexuality, jealousy, like all these quote unquote bad emotions that we all have because we're human.
Mhm.
But when we're taught to kind of like push those down and, like, oh, I'm not angry, they can still be there. They usually are still
Mhm.
there somewhere,
Mhm.
and they can affect us unconsciously if we're not aware of them. So that was something I also really wanted to explore in this book for all of the women. And Rosa, that was kind of a choice to have Rosa, her shadow parts are out, right? Like, she doesn't
Mhm.
have to hide anything. Like,
Mhm.
she's very open, aggressive. She says whatever she wants. She does whatever she wants. So that in itself was kind of freeing and fun to write.
Yeah. What is your writing routine like now? What does your writing routine look like?
So um, currently I'm on a little bit of a break. I just sent my next book to my editor last Friday.
Yay!
So that feels good. So I'm having a little bit of a break this week, and that feels good. But normally, I like to write in the morning. I
Mm.
feel like And when I was working at a full-time job, I would usually write before work.
Mhm.
I found that if I waited until later, I would just be too tired or too distracted to do it.
Mhm, mhm.
So yeah, so these days, normally it's like writing for 2 to 3 hours in the morning, and then doing other things. I see clients, throughout the day. But I think doing the writing first thing, I think it goes a little faster too,
Yeah.
because
Do you sit down for like a solid 2 to 3 hours and you're able to just write for that period of time? Or are you sort of doing sprints or what is that?
Mhm. For this book, it's changed. Like when I was writing the writing retreat, again, I was working a lot more, so I was writing less. I think
Mm.
I was only writing like an hour, um, 45 minutes an hour, or maybe a little bit longer than that every morning. And I was writing in bed too. Now I don't do that because I like to like try to go outside in the morning. Otherwise, I'm just
Oh, cool.
inside for the majority of the day. Um, but yeah, like I was usually able to just kind of like write through that. And nowadays when I have a little bit more time and I'm spending a little more time writing, I do take little breaks here and there. Like if I finish a chapter, I'll get up and maybe make some more coffee,
Mm.
walk around. Yeah, for the most part, I like to do like a chunk, so do like a chapter or two if possible. It depends though. If I'm editing, it might look different than that.
Yeah.
What about you? How do you write?
I right now I can't seem to do anything unless I'm like setting a timer for a specific amount of time. And
Yeah.
it's got to be usually it's 20 minutes and
Mhm.
it's not that like hands have to stay on the keyboard for that amount of time. And then, even if I'm just taking a couple of minutes in between just to like take a sip of coffee or whatever, then I need that little bit of pressure and you've got to just get something out
Totally.
on me to be able to do. I think that's how I've trained my brain or tricked it into doing it. And now it just feels necessary.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do that. I know my sister does that. I think it's called the Pomodoro method.
I think it's, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't well, and speaking of your sister, that was gonna be, my next question is you come from a family of writers, as it were. Your sister is also a best-selling author. So what's that like?
So yeah, Andy and I think both of us were writers from a very young age, and we would write things together, and we would write little stories, and we would write like little movie scripts, and we wrote like one of them was like an X-Files like spec script that we wrote when we were like 8 and 10 or something like that. We love the X-Files growing up. So yeah, she's always been a writer. She went into journalism and was working in various magazines, women's magazines and Psychology Today, and then she was doing travel writing. And then at a certain point, she decided to try writing novels. And since she is such a talented writer, it worked out really well for her. I think her first book came out, it was 2019, 2018, 2019. Um, and yeah, so it's been really helpful. Obviously, at the time, I was extremely excited and happy for her, and I was going through my own
Oh,
issues with my writing. So there,
yeah.
of course, were feelings of like envy that were coming up. But I also saw how hard she worked, and I knew that she really deserved it.
Mm,
So it's actually been really helpful for me because she has been through all of this, the whole publishing process. So at any stage in the process, she was able to provide feedback. I have other writer friends too who are also really good about that. And that feels really nice to just have people that I can go to with any questions because, there are things that come up, and sometimes you're like, does this make sense? Is this normal? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And people have different ways of doing things. For example, Andy is great at social media.
mm,
um, I feel like I I do social media too, but it's definitely not to the same degree and in the same way. But it's something that I can kind of look at and see like, oh, that's like an interesting idea or that's a cool way of doing it.
Mhm.
So it's been good. And then her last book came out last summer. It's called The Spare Room. Incredible thriller about a woman who moves in with a couple during COVID lockdown and basically starts a throuple situation with them and then finds out that their last third disappeared.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that was fun too. We got to do some promo together and some interviews and some little news segments. So that's felt really cool to be able to share that with her.
What advice do you have? Well, you have lots, but what would you say is the main piece of advice that you have for aspiring authors?
Mm, yeah. I think I have two main pieces of advice.
Great.
Um, the first is just to try to find joy in the process as much as possible,
Mm,
and whether that means maybe slowing down with something, whether that means, the opposite, maybe devoting more time to a project, whether that means like figuring out how to make your project as fascinating to you as possible, like including different elements that like really speak to you. Just really figuring out how to make it fun and enjoyable and pleasurable. Because as I said before, it can be really easy to kind of fall into this trap of like, oh, like I just got to get to the finish line, and that means I have to do
yeah.
this. Like that pressure and energy can be, a little, again, demoralizing, and it may actually take away from the project too. Like I think our best work, different from Rosa's point of view in the book, I think our best work actually comes when we're feeling the most like excited and content with what we're working on.
Yeah.
The second thing would be to try to find community in any way that feels good for you, whether that's, looking for writing groups that are in your community or neighborhood or city, or just having friends who love to talk about books. I've had some clients who, um, again, don't really have a huge writing community, and they can feel stuck at different points. And I think even just being able to call a writer friend or a friend who's interested in books and being able to like, hey, can I just like share some ideas with you? Can we kind of brainstorm this a little bit? I think that can really help people get excited about their project again.
Mhm.
Um, and also just to, again, there are specific things to do at different stages of being a writer. And of course, you can Google that and get information. And it can also be helpful to speak to people who are maybe going through it as well or have gone through it and can maybe give you some specific advice on how to do it.
And if people want to talk to you about creative coaching, where can they find you?
Yeah, people can feel free to reach out to me at you can go to my website and there's a button to push if you'd like to fill out a short form to potentially become a coaching client. I'm also taking a couple of therapy clients right now. If anyone listening is in New York and looking for a therapist, you can write to me at juliabartztherapy@gmail.com. And then I'm also on Instagram at Julia Bartz. And we'll also, can respond to people there too.
Great. All right. We have a traditional last question on the podcast, which is when the writing retreat is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my goodness. Song. I thought you were going to ask about actors.
People always say that. You can tell us the actors too.
Well, the actor that I would most love to see, this is so funny because I was talking about X-Files before, but
Mhm.
I think Gillian Anderson would be an amazing Rosa.
Oh, that would be great.
Wouldn't she be great? Yeah. In terms of songs, I did actually create a playlist for the writing retreat, which people can find on my Instagram. Um, and I think the first song was Garbage, Number One Crush,
Hmm.
which is, yeah, a song that Also, Shirley Manson, the lead singer of Garbage, is kind of Rosa-esque. She has like red hair
Mm.
and she's
Ah,
very charismatic, and her music is a little gothy. So I would say let's go with that song.
I love it. It's a great one.
Yeah.
Julia Bartz, thank you so much. It has been awesome talking to you. Love the book. Also, such great advice for writers trying to go through this whole process. So, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much, Kelley. This was so fun.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.